Probably one of the biggest accomplishments you'll ever make in life is being able to raw dog it, fully raw dogging through life. And by raw dogging, I mean getting through life without drinking, without substances, without excessive caffeine, without codependency, perfectionism, workaholism, overeating, shopping fixes, none of that. Instead, you go through life using healthy coping skills, adaptive and mindful coping tools. You learn how to be self compassionate, self accepting, and figure out the art of sitting with your feelings. Now, many of you might say you're already there. And I'd say it will take anywhere between 30 to 60 years to achieve this, while others will say it's impossible. And only when they die will that happen. Some people might say there's no fun in living that way and that it's super boring to raw dog life. And while the boring part might be true, let's take a moment in this video to go through the journey of how to even get there and why, for many people, this is the only way. If you've been following my videos for a while, you know that I live a very mindful life. And so it's a process of self-actualization. And as I was preparing for this video on raw dogging life, there were a few concepts that came to mind that I wanted to cover that will bring all of this into full view. The first thing I'm going to talk about is something called anhedonia. This is what sums up the boredom that people refer to, the loss of joy when these pleasures or quick fixes are done away with. The second area that I will discuss is asceticism, which for many people hearing about the raw dogging life will seem like it's monk mode. And it very much is. And there is a link between this monk mode and anhedonia that I'm going to also get into a little bit. Finally, I'll bring up the good old Maslow's hierarchy of needs to fully bring this into perspective. And keep in mind, this isn't for everyone. Not everyone is here for self-actualization. Many people are only realistically in the paradigm of survival, and that's fine. We will respect that. Meanwhile, if you're on the path of breaking out of the matrix, then this part is an important concept for you to understand. Concept, model, whichever, philosophy, you know what I mean. So let's start with how boring life is going to be once you don't drink anymore, you don't rely on substances or overconsumption of food, you're not out there shopping to fill the void. And for those of you saying, don't take away my coffee, yo, you're safe, okay? I'm talking about excessive caffeine, like to the point where you use it to fuel you through the day and maybe even as an appetite suppressant. So it's important for you to understand if you have a healthy relationship with these things or if they're being used as a dependency and a maladaptive coping tool. Meanwhile, some people might think that a little spot of whiskey by the fire on a cold winter's night isn't doing any harm, or a glass of fine wine to celebrate an anniversary or whatever. It's up to you to know how these spirits are impacting your overall energetic makeup. And why do you need to fill your space and the cells of your body with these substances? If the reason why you drink to begin with is to change or enhance your feeling state, then I challenge you to question why you deny your own innate capabilities to do this on your own. One key thing that this does come down to is dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical messenger in the brain that affects many bodily functions, including movement, mood, and memory. It's often called the feel-good chemical because it's released when you do something enjoyable. So along with this sounds really boring, you also may conclude that your days of fun are over, but they don't have to be. Dopamine is part of the brain's reward system, which motivates people to repeat behaviors that feel good. Hence, having a drink, going shopping, eating a bowl or two or a tub of ice cream. In the moment, you feel good. Afterwards, what's the payoff? Dopamine also plays a role in our learning and memory. So all the things that you've been doing to trigger the brain's reward system is being learned, is being remembered. So you continue to fire that same neural pathway over and over again. Meanwhile, you've taught your neurotransmitters that they are receiving enough dopamine and that they don't need to produce it naturally. And well, for some people, the brain is already struggling to produce dopamine, hence the ADHDers who are prescribed meds to help with that. So, for the other self medicating folks out there who need to imbibe in these practices just to feel normal, what happens over the course of time is this long term damage and inability for you to produce dopamine on your own. And dopamine deficiencies can show up in our life as problems with anger, low self esteem, anxiety, forgetfulness, impulsivity, lack of organizational skills, social withdrawal, even reduced emotions where you don't feel a lot of pleasure. So once you give up everything that brought you pleasure, to perhaps an already difficult life, what's going to set in is something called anhedonia. Anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure. It's a loss of joy for life in a state of blah. And there's a few reasons why someone's going to be experiencing this. Like I said, withdrawal from substances after a long term use, even withdrawal from toxic relationships, hence the codependency and trauma bonds. But what all those things have in common is they impact the dopamine receptors of the brain. Using substances over years and years causes dopamine to be released in the brain. And after a while, the brain stops producing natural dopamine because it's been fed so much dopamine already. The brain is sensing a good supply, so it stops making it on its own. But the person continues to use the alcohol or drugs to feel good. And when they stop, they feel blah. That's the cycle. But there's much more to the cycle because the blah is depressing. It's a lack of joy for life. And so what is harming them is what they also see as the solution to their emotional well-being. So what's left is this apathetic, lethargic, no interest in the things that once brought you joy. Anhedonia. Although you're becoming healthier in your body, your brain is still struggling to feel the joy. Your thinking may be clearer and your productivity may have increased, but you still feel as though part of you is missing. This is where many people will relapse because they remember how using would make them feel at least something. But in the long term, of course, it's not the answer. And the truth is that one relapse back to an old substance, the effect might not even be the same. And remember, these addictions are not only to substances, but also to food, consumerism, spending, even people. So many get to the point in life where the costs start to dramatically outweigh the benefits. And what also happens with addiction is the effects start to wear off. Tolerance is developed. What used to work doesn't work anymore. And usually people will swap one thing for something else. Sometimes people will say, I used weed to get off alcohol, or I used caffeine to stop eating so much. It just goes from one form of dopamine to another. So what one has to be prepared for is the drop in dopamine. One has to understand that in order for our brain to be given a chance to produce dopamine on its own, we have to remove what it's been unnaturally relying on. Many times we seek love and relationships for these highs, but those quickly wear off too. And it becomes another unhealthy and unsustainable route to feel good. But when we keep turning to these dopamine hits, it takes a toll on our nervous system. It keeps us in a state of fight or flight. We're never really able to relax. And we taught ourselves that to relax means we take something or we rely on something outside of ourselves to feel better or to be productive. We use this. Let's face it, the world is based on getting quick fixes, and no one really has the time or patience to ride it out. This raw dogging life isn't easy, and it will come with some very low periods. But if we can understand that with every week that passes by, it will get better. And the trick is not to replace one thing for another. It's also not to stop everything at once. What you will notice is that once you set the intention to become more mindful in the way you live, things naturally start to drop off. Whether it's the habits in your spending, eating, drinking, social environments, you intuitively know that you need to realign your energy. And the only way to do that is to eliminate these dependencies. It's all in an effort to become a more healthy and regulated person. And why would we want to do that? Well, because what we've been trying to do before has reached its expiry date. We can feel that we've gone beyond what is reasonable in terms of the efforts we've been making by continuing to engage in these unhealthy behaviors. Our intuitive nature becomes stronger than our addictive cravings. We start to listen to the call. Which brings me to the next item to discuss, which is the ascetic way of living. I know of many Buddhist monks that have chosen the ascetic life because they were fraught in an addictive lifestyle. And although it may be an all or nothing view, I think for modern living, we can find the middle path here. Raw dogging life in this sense doesn't mean you have to join a monastery or become a monk, but you continue to function as you are without having to advertise it in this way. It doesn't have to be so formal, it doesn't have to be so extreme and so dramatic. There are many people who are living a life that is free from pleasures, but within that, they have found a different pleasure. And this is an equally effective way to find yourself meeting the path and the purpose of pursuing spiritual goals. Ascetics may withdraw from the world, and you may find that you have done so too. And this may be because you no longer resonate with a world that is based on consumption and dependence. You might actually develop a very frugal lifestyle. You may still have some of the certain luxuries, but overall, these things are not overly important to you. And this is where we practice the art of non-attachment to things. Because you don't have such things doesn't make you less than, especially if you were someone who was always concerned about image or success. You're really starting to redefine this now. Many of you know that I've recently moved, and moving appears to be something that I've become a master of now, having moved 4 times, I think, in the last 5 years. And each time I get rid of more and more stuff. I'm constantly questioning my purchases because they need to be purposeful and not just fillers. But like I said, some individuals have also attempted an ascetic lifestyle to free themselves from addictions to things such as alcohol, tobacco, drugs, entertainment, sex, food. The raw dog in life I'm speaking about here is not about getting rid of things as much as it is about having the ability to sustain yourself on what naturally you have the ability to achieve by just being a human, nothing else. Being self sustaining on your own energy reserves. And whatever challenges come your way, you can rely on your own innate abilities to survive it. There's no checking out, and instead, it's always about checking in with what my needs are. Instead of filling a void, we are entering the void, not stuffing it so it goes away or is silenced for a while, but stepping into it, facing it, understanding it, which is now fully understanding yourself. And by doing that, you step into the field of enlightenment. You step into a new reality. Stepping into the void will appear, well, like a void. The black hole, it's the dark night of the soul, it's your shadow. But once you fully understand yourself through that dark void, you understand the things that you actually need and the things that you actually don't need. You just want, or you used to want these things to fill the void. To raw dog life means you have come face to face with yourself. You have to be willing to say, yeah, I'm not really a fan of this part of me, or this part of my life, or the choices that I've made in the past that have landed me where I am today. That's why this is possibly the biggest accomplishment you will ever achieve, because most people will live their lives in a constant state of avoidance of themselves. And that's fine. They're not here for this mission. They're not interested in that right now. So who cares about what other people are doing or what opinions other people will have about what you're doing? What this raw dogging business is about is not giving a shit about any of that. Because if you're someone who is ready to enter the new paradigm, exit the old reality, while yes, still being amongst all of this stuff that is going on in this crazy world, then you have to understand this last part. The hierarchy of needs. We all have different needs, and let's not judge where everyone is right now. Stay in your own lane and be real about what you are in need of. Physiologically, we all need to breathe, eat, have some sort of shelter just to be here. Without that need, well, we die. Then we have a need to be safe and secure within our shelter. So many of us are here just to work, to feel a sense of financial safety, while many people do struggle with financial insecurity. And that is the reality for so many of us. But once we figure out how to live within our means, and for many people, that means being very creative and sustainable with what we have. Then we can reach a sense of belonging. Now, this sense of belonging can be with nature and within ourselves. We have to understand how that sense of belonging will look different for everyone. But you know you have that once you've secured your self-esteem and self-worth. You feel good about who you are and what you've accomplished. You're meeting your own needs in this regard, not from a place of shame, but from a place of courage and willingness and pride. You have come to a state of acceptance and finally self-actualized. Now, before you can even get here, look at how raw dogging life is going to play a role in each of these areas versus seeking outside pleasure to have each of these areas met. If you are seeking external pleasure to have them met, then what happens is you are given a false sense of each need being met. And then you wonder why you can't be self-actualized. Because just as it says, self-actualized, self, at this level, it's impossible to trick yourself. It can't happen. And that's where a lot of people start to crumble. So, on that note, raw dogging life is not an easy path. But the lone wolves out there, I know all about you. And I know this is exactly your path because I know many of you have had the path of addiction, of dependency. The only option for those on the spiritually seeking path is to go at it from this place of complete raw dogging. You might be white knuckling it. You're hanging on for dear life with your own self-sustainable resources.